Hey guys, tonight's story is about the hunt for the king of the dark web, a young Canadian who built AlphaBay into the world's biggest black market, only to be brought down by a single email slip and a staged crash outside his gate. No SWAT raids, no bullets, just one unencrypted laptop, an unlocked email, and a global manhunt that brought down the king of the dark web. So before you get comfortable, if you enjoy what I do here, consider liking the video and subscribing. It really helps me keep making these videos. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see you guys tuning in every night. Now, dim the lights, put on some headphones for a more immersive experience, and let's ease into tonight's story together. On the morning of July 5th, 2017, a man sits in front of his laptop in his Bangkok villa, living what most people would consider the perfect criminal life. Online, nobody knows his real name. He goes by Alpha02, a pseudonym that strikes fear into law enforcement agencies worldwide. He's a multi-millionaire who's built his fortune in the shadows of the internet, driving luxury cars and living in expensive properties across Southeast Asia. Thailand feels like the perfect sanctuary for someone in his line of work, far from American law enforcement, comfortable climate, and authorities who can be reasoned with if the price is right. He's convinced himself that he's untouchable, protected by layers of encryption, anonymous currencies, and thousands of miles between him and his enemies. Suddenly, a loud crash echoes from the front of his property, shattering the morning calm. The sound of metal crumpling and glass breaking cuts through the tropical air. A woman has slammed her Toyota Camry straight into his front gate, creating a mess of twisted metal and automotive carnage that's definitely going to require some explaining to the neighbors. Without thinking which will prove to be the biggest mistake of his criminal career, he abandons his laptop and rushes outside to see what happened. It's a completely natural human reaction, the kind of impulse that makes people forget about operational security and digital anonymity in favor of basic curiosity and concern. The driver appears shaken but uninjured, probably apologizing profusely in Thai while examining the damage to both her car and his expensive gate. What Alpha02 doesn't realize is that this woman isn't just some unlucky driver having a bad morning. She's an agent with the Royal Thai Police, and this accident was carefully orchestrated down to the last detail. FBI and DEA investigators have been planning this moment for months, coordinating with law enforcement agencies from 7 different countries. They've been watching, waiting, and preparing for the perfect opportunity to catch the king of the dark web with his guard down. Today, their patience finally pays off. The question everyone's been asking for years is about to be answered. Can the world's most wanted cybercriminal actually be caught? It's the early 2010s, and the internet is experiencing a revolution that most people don't even know is happening. The dark web is gaining serious momentum, attracting everyone from privacy-conscious journalists to hardcore criminals looking for a new marketplace. The promise of complete anonymity and freedom from government surveillance is drawing more users every day, creating a parallel internet economy that operates by completely different rules. Then Bitcoin arrives on the scene, changing everything overnight. For the first time in history, there's a form of digital payment that governments can't easily control or trace. No banks, no regulations, no central authority keeping track of who's buying what from whom. It's like someone invented invisible money that can be sent anywhere in the world instantly. This combination of anonymous browsing and untraceable payments creates the perfect storm for criminal enterprise. Suddenly, it becomes easier than ever for drug dealers, weapon sellers, and other criminals to operate at a massive global scale without ever meeting their customers face to face. The dark web transforms from a niche tool for privacy enthusiasts into a bustling criminal marketplace worth billions of dollars. Law enforcement agencies around the world realize they're facing an entirely new type of crime, one that doesn't respect borders and operates according to rules they barely understand. The gigantic global game of cat and mouse between authorities and cybercriminals begins in earnest, and it continues to escalate to this day, becoming more sophisticated and dangerous with each passing year. The Silk Road stands as perhaps the most legendary dark web marketplace in internet history, the site that proved anonymous online drug dealing could work on a massive scale. The platform launched in February 2011 and quickly became the Amazon of illegal substances, attracting more than 100,000 customers who bought everything from marijuana to heroin with the click of a button. But success bred overconfidence, and just 2.5 years after going live, law enforcement caught the site's operator. The Silk Road went dark forever. and authorities celebrated by giving its founder a life sentence, hoping to send a clear message that the dark web wouldn't be tolerated. They underestimated the money involved. The business was simply too profitable for other criminals to ignore, and the closure of the original Silk Road created a power vacuum that dozens of entrepreneurs rushed to fill. The number of darknet markets exploded practically overnight, with each new site fighting desperately for the top position in this digital criminal hierarchy. Silk Road 2.0 launched just 35 days after its predecessor's demise, brazenly using the same name and promising to continue the legacy. But lightning doesn't strike twice. The site survived less than a year before authorities shut it down too. Evolution emerged as another major player, growing to a size comparable to both Silk Roads combined. The platform operated using an escrow system where customers deposited Bitcoin before making purchases, and sellers only got paid after successful delivery. This meant Evolution's operators were sitting on an incredible amount of money at all times, millions of dollars in Bitcoin just waiting in digital wallets. Eventually, temptation proved too strong. The operators decided to steal everything and disappear, pulling off what's known in criminal circles as an exit scam. One day the site was bustling with activity, the next it was gone along with everyone's money. Between exit scams, arrests, voluntary closures and sophisticated hacking attacks, the dark web marketplace landscape was in constant chaos. But all this instability was creating an opportunity for a new player, one that would eventually dwarf all previous sites in size and scope. That marketplace was called AlphaBay, and it was about to change the criminal internet forever. In July 2014, a man calling himself Alpha02 starts coding what will become the dark web's ultimate criminal marketplace. Just 5 months later, which is basically light speed in the world of underground platforms, AlphaBay goes live on the internet's shadiest corners. Initially, the site focuses on stolen credit card data, because apparently regular fraud wasn't exciting enough anymore. But Alpha02 quickly realizes there's way more money in diversification. Soon AlphaBay is offering drugs, weapons, malware, and even money laundering services. It's like a criminal department store where almost anything illegal is available with just a few clicks. The platform does have some rules, though. Items related to child abuse are strictly banned, along with hitman services and anything involving stolen Russian bank accounts. Alpha02 probably doesn't want to anger Russian law enforcement. Those guys don't mess around. Maybe he's also trying to make investigators think he's Russian himself, throwing them off his real trail while building his digital empire in relative safety. The website operates exactly like Amazon, except instead of buying books and kitchen gadgets, you're purchasing heroin and assault rifles. It's disturbingly user-friendly, complete with search functions, product filters, and organized categories that make illegal shopping feel almost normal. Payment options include Bitcoin, Monero, and Ethereum, all designed to keep transactions anonymous and untraceable. AlphaBay even offers something called a tumbler, a service that mixes your cryptocurrency with other people's money, making it nearly impossible to trace where payments originated. The platform works flawlessly and quickly dominates the entire dark web marketplace scene. While competing sites pop up and disappear like digital fireworks, AlphaBay keeps growing stronger. User numbers explode almost overnight. Just 1 year after launching, the site has more than 200,000 registered users and 40,000 active sellers hawking their illegal wares. By 2017, AlphaBay hosts over 300,000 different items and processes more than $500,000 in sales every single day. Alpha02 takes a cut of every transaction, between 2 and 4%, which quickly turns him into a multi-millionaire living off other people's criminal activities. Success brings expansion. Alpha02 builds an entire team to run his empire. A representative called The Snake handles daily operations, multiple moderators resolve disputes between buyers and sellers, and there's even a PR manager to handle the site's public image. With everything running smoothly, the founder decides to step back from day-to-day management. He renames himself from Alpha02 to simply Admin, and routes all communication through The Snake, adding another layer of protection between himself and law enforcement. As Alpha02 retreats into the shadows, American investigators become increasingly obsessed with discovering his true identity. Who is this digital criminal mastermind ruling the dark side of the internet? From behind multiple layers of encryption and anonymity, a global manhunt begins that will stretch across multiple countries and consume years of investigative resources. The American team's first priority is locating AlphaBay's servers. With physical access to the servers, they could either shut down the platform immediately or secretly infiltrate it, and potentially identify the operators. But finding servers on the dark web is like looking for a needle in a haystack made of other needles. IP addresses normally reveal location information, but closed networks like Tor are specifically designed to prevent this. Website requests get bounced through numerous random servers scattered across the globe, making it virtually impossible to trace anything back to its source. The entire system is purposely designed to frustrate law enforcement efforts. Faced with this digital fortress, investigators try a different approach. They start browsing AlphaBay themselves, making anonymous drug purchases, and hoping sellers make mistakes. Maybe product packaging or postage stamps will reveal clues about individual dealers' identities, leading to arrests that could provide information about the platform's operators. But these are just small fish in a massive criminal ocean. Drug dealers come and go constantly, easily replaced by new criminals looking for quick money. The investigators want the big prize, Alpha-02 himself. The mastermind behind AlphaBay seems to understand every rule of digital security perfectly. He anticipates every move law enforcement might make and stays several steps ahead of even the most sophisticated investigative techniques. The investigators grow increasingly desperate as months pass without any breakthrough, until December 2016 brings an unexpected gift. Robert Miller sits at his desk in Fresno, California, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. He works for the DEA, the American Drug Enforcement Agency, and has been grinding away on the AlphaBay case for months with little to show for it. Until today, it's been a pretty thankless assignment that seems destined to go nowhere. Then an email appears in his inbox that changes everything. The sender remains completely anonymous, but the contents are pure gold. Apparently, Alpha-02 made a catastrophic mistake during AlphaBay's early days that nobody noticed at the time. Every user who registered on the platform back then received an automated welcome email, standard practice for most websites, but due to a configuration error, the true sender's email address was visible in the message metadata, a rookie mistake that should have been caught immediately. Although the error got fixed quickly, this anonymous tipster had saved one of those original welcome emails and sat on it for years. Maybe they were one of Alpha-02's first customers. Maybe they worked for a competing marketplace that somehow got hold of the message. Nobody knows their identity or motivation. But after watching AlphaBay grow into a criminal empire worth millions of dollars, they finally decided to hand over the crucial evidence to American law enforcement. The email address reads, pimpalex91@hotmail.com. Not exactly the most sophisticated alias for someone running a global criminal operation. This single email address becomes the breakthrough Miller and his colleagues have been desperately seeking for months. Through careful investigation, they traced the address to photos from 2008 and 2009, showing someone named Alex on Skyrock.com, a French-language social media platform that was popular with young people. The profile also links to an old dating website, where Alex lists Trois-Rivières as his hometown, a city in southern Quebec, Canada. According to the profile, he was 17 years old at the time, which means the 91 in his email address likely represents his birth year. Simple math suggests he would have been 23 when AlphaBay launched, which fits the timeline perfectly. Further digging reveals that the username Alpha-02 appeared on a French-language technology forum back in 2008, where this person posted instructions for removing viruses from image files. At the bottom of the post, clear as day, sits both his email address and his complete real name, Alexandre Cazes. Now, investigators have a name, but they still need to find their target. They locate Cazes' PayPal account, which conveniently uses the same private email address he's been using everywhere else. His LinkedIn profile reveals that he works as a freelance software designer, and apparently runs his own technology company called EBX Technologies. The final piece comes from Facebook, where investigators discover the profile of his fiancée, a Thai woman whose photos suggest that this Canadian criminal mastermind is currently living somewhere in Thailand, probably thinking he's completely safe from North American law enforcement. The investigative trail leads straight to Bangkok, Thailand's bustling capital, where Alexandre Cazes has been living his best criminal life. Working with Thai authorities, the team identifies 3 separate properties owned by this digital crime lord scattered across the city. There's his main residence in an exclusive gated community where he lives with his wife, trying to play the role of respectable businessman. Then there's a second house, and a jaw-dropping $3 million mansion on Bangkok's outskirts that screams, "I definitely didn't earn this money legally." He's also got a holiday home in Phuket, and is apparently in the process of buying another villa in Cyprus. Because why not collect properties like trading cards? Surveillance begins immediately. Cazes' multi-millionaire lifestyle includes an impressive car collection that he loves showing off around Bangkok. Investigators watch him cruise through traffic in his bright yellow Lamborghini, probably thinking he's the coolest guy in Southeast Asia. Agents follow his routes, track his iPhone, and document every aspect of his daily routine. Here's where it gets interesting. While Cazes maintains the facade of a happily married man at his main residence, he takes his numerous affairs to what investigators dubbed the bachelor pad, one of his other Bangkok properties specifically used for cheating on his wife. Cazes is also an active member of a pickup artist forum where grown men give each other advice on manipulating women. Under the username Raw Mayo, which is about as cringy as it sounds, he posts conservative family values while simultaneously keeping a detailed blog about his extramarital conquests. The hypocrisy is impressive even by criminal standards. Apart from the cheating and criminal empire management, his daily life is surprisingly mundane for someone who calls himself the king of the dark web. He wakes up early, scrolls through social media like everyone else, works from home, and spends most evenings at his main residence. Occasionally he attends language classes or takes his wife out for dinner, probably while texting his other girlfriends under the table. Around these predictable routines, authorities meticulously plan his capture. Then, in June 2017, something almost derails everything. A few American agents are sitting in the luxurious lounge of Bangkok's five-star Arthany Hotel when Cazes suddenly appears. He parks his Porsche Panamera right at the entrance and casually walks through the lobby, heading directly toward the agent's table. Bangkok has thousands of hotels. What are the odds? Have they been discovered? Has the king of the dark web somehow figured out he's being watched and decided to confront his pursuers directly? Cazes sits down at a table just meters away from the agents, close enough that they can hear his conversation. It turns out to be nothing more than an incredible coincidence. He's there for a routine business dinner, completely unaware that his hunters are sitting nearby. None of them realize that in exactly 1 month, Alexandre Cazes will be dead. AlphaBay dominates the global darknet scene, but it's not alone. In Europe, Hansa Market is growing rapidly and giving authorities major headaches. Dutch investigators catch a break when a security researcher tips them off about Hansa's servers, located in a Netherlands data center. The Dutch start monitoring the servers, copying data, and digging through chat logs between operators. They discover Hansa's administrators are Germans, probably still living in Germany, so they coordinate with German Federal Criminal Police. But Hansa Market suddenly vanishes from the Dutch servers. The administrators figured out they'd been compromised and moved everything. However, authorities had already extracted Bitcoin wallet addresses from the chat logs. They track these cryptocurrency transactions to a Dutch crypto exchange, then follow the Bitcoin trail to Lithuania. Working with Lithuanian authorities, Germans and Dutch launch an international effort to locate the new servers. Then the FBI drops unexpected news. American authorities reveal plans to arrest Alpha-02 and shut down AlphaBay. This creates Operation Bayonet, an ambitious international coordination effort involving 7 countries, led by the FBI and DEA. Here's the brilliant strategy. The FBI agrees to delay their AlphaBay takedown until the Dutch gain control of Hansa Market first. When AlphaBay shuts down, thousands of criminals will migrate to other platforms. But this time they'll move to a platform secretly controlled by law enforcement, the ultimate honeypot. Alexandre Cazes continues his oblivious life in Bangkok, driving his Lamborghini and cheating on his wife, unaware that an international dragnet is closing around him. On June 20th, 2017, Phase 1 succeeds. Dutch forces storm the Lithuanian data center while Germans arrest both Hansa operators in Siegen and Cologne. The arrests happen so quickly that operators can't warn anyone. Hansa Market is now under Dutch law enforcement control, and nobody in the dark web knows what happened. July 5th, 2017, Bangkok. After more than 2 years of investigation, planning, and international coordination, today is finally the day. There's an arrest warrant with Alexandre Cazes' name on it, and the Royal Thai Police, DEA, and FBI are ready to bring down the king of the dark web once and for all. A grey Toyota Camry drives slowly down the dead-end street toward Cazes' gated community residence, with a Royal Thai Police agent behind the wheel. She approaches the security guard and explains that she took a wrong turn and needs to reverse direction. But as she attempts to turn around in the narrow space, she accidentally crashes into Cazes' front gate. The crash is loud, dramatic, and exactly what investigators hoped for. The noise and sudden commotion are designed to lure Cazes outside spontaneously, before he has time to think about potential security implications or take precautions with his equipment. This timing is absolutely critical to the operation's success. If Cazes comes outside immediately to investigate the accident, his computers should still be unlocked and accessible. But if he suspects something and has time to shut down his systems, encrypted hard drives could make it impossible for authorities to access AlphaBay's servers and databases. The plan works perfectly. Cazes hears the crash and leaves his house to check on the situation, bringing only his cell phone. He approaches the Toyota to see what happened, probably thinking this is just another annoying inconvenience in his otherwise comfortable criminal life. Suddenly, multiple officers emerge from concealment and rush toward Cazes. He realizes what's happening and tries to run back toward his house, likely hoping to reach his computer and execute emergency shutdown procedures that would lock authorities out of AlphaBay forever. But he's completely outnumbered and overpowered within seconds. While officers restrain Cazes outside, investigators rush into his house searching for his laptop. They find it in the bedroom, powered on, unlocked, and displaying active sessions. The king of the dark web has been captured, and his digital kingdom is wide open. Alpha-02 is still logged into the servers hosting AlphaBay when authorities seize his laptop, giving them immediate access to the entire criminal empire he spent years building. Investigators search through his computer and discover multiple passwords for AlphaBay's website and server infrastructure, along with detailed records of the platform's operations and finances. The Canadian criminal mastermind had accumulated a personal fortune worth $23 million through his darknet marketplace activities. Authorities immediately begin seizing everything: his collection of luxury cars, multiple properties across Thailand and other countries, a hotel business, and millions of dollars in various cryptocurrencies stored in digital wallets around the world. Cazes' wife doesn't escape the legal consequences either. The Thai woman gets charged with money laundering, accused of helping her husband hide and legitimize his criminal profits through legitimate business ventures and property investments. 1 week later, on July 12th, Alexandre Cazes is found dead in his Thai jail cell. He committed suicide while in custody, unable to face the prospect of spending the rest of his life in American federal prison. The king of the dark web's reign comes to an abrupt and permanent end. The shutdown of AlphaBay is kept secret by authorities, creating confusion in the criminal community. When the platform suddenly goes dark, nobody knows why. An exit scam? A hack? Have the operators retired? As expected, countless users migrate to other darknet platforms, including Hansa Market. For 4 weeks, Dutch authorities watch thousands of criminals trade on the platform they secretly control. They collect valuable incriminating evidence. On July 20th, 2017, Hansa Market gets shut down as well. The same day, the US Department of Justice announces the end of AlphaBay and Hansa, a gigantic success for global authorities. The dark web isn't evil technology just for criminals. We need places where whistleblowers and journalists are relatively safe. Marketplaces like AlphaBay are part of the picture, though. The global game of cat and mouse is far from over. Demand for illegal drugs, weapons, counterfeit money, and malware is too high. It doesn't take long for AlphaBay and Hansa to be forgotten. Users flock to other existing platforms. New darknet markets sprout up and position themselves better than the former leaders. The Russian darknet market, Hydra, was at times twice the size of AlphaBay. In 2021, it was also shut down by German and American authorities. Now there's a new contest for the title of King of the Dark Web. A promising contender is D-Snake. He relaunched AlphaBay in 2021 and still runs the darknet marketplace today. The hunt for Alpha-02 showed just how far cybercrime had evolved. An empire of drugs, weapons, and secrets sold from behind a keyboard. But this wasn't where digital crime began. Long before the darknet markets, before Bitcoin and Tor, there was another story, one of the very first times hackers broke into the financial world itself. A bold theft against Citibank that would go down as the first true cyber heist in history. August 26, 1994, San Francisco, United States. It's barely dawn when 2 FBI agents are racing through San Francisco streets like their lives depend on it. Meanwhile, a Russian woman walks into a bank and asks to withdraw almost $500,000. Just another Tuesday morning, right? The teller tries stalling her. Maybe wait a few minutes? Cute. This woman isn't some confused grandma, she's Russian mafia, and she's the final piece in a plan to rob American Citibank. The clock's ticking for the FBI, who've been waiting months for this moment. Just as she's about to leave, the agents crash through the door and tell her to get down. At the exact same time, some guy in Israel gets arrested trying to withdraw similar money using a fake identity. Weird coincidence? Not really. People worldwide were hitting banks every few weeks, trying to pull millions, all supposedly from Citibank. The computers said everything was fine. There was just one tiny problem. Citibank wasn't authorizing any of this. Some mystery hacker was cleaning out the bank from behind a computer screen. No guns, no masks, just pure digital theft. This triggered an international manhunt, dragged in the Russian mafia, and created a mystery that cybersecurity folks still lose sleep over. This is the completely insane story of the Citibank hack, history's first cyber heist. But issue 42 wasn't just another how-to guide. It had something special. A massive list of addresses connected to the X.25 network. Before everyone got obsessed with the internet, X.25 was the king of networks. Big companies used it to connect to everything, including the Sprint network. Think of Sprint as the superhighway for business data. Companies could send information across huge distances at lightning speed. Pretty impressive for 1993. Frack had listed dozens of interesting targets, but one jumped out like a neon sign: Citibank, one of America's biggest banks, laid out in perfect detail. Here's the weird part. Unlike every other company on the list, Citibank didn't have a geographical location. No address, no somewhere in New York notation, just nothing. That blank space was like catnip to Arkanoid. Within minutes he was calling up one of his hacker buddies. Time to take a little digital field trip into Citibank's systems and see what secrets America's financial giants were hiding. As Arkanoid and his buddy dove into Citibank's network, they bumped into someone else. Turns out, other hackers had also read Frack magazine. Who would have thought? According to Arkanoid's own blog post, Citibank's lower-level networks were basically open to anyone with half a brain. Even weirder, hackers could actually chat with each other inside the bank's system. It was like a secret clubhouse, except the clubhouse happened to be America's financial infrastructure. So Arkanoid, his friend, this new guy, and a bunch of other digital trespassers started forming research groups right inside Citibank's network. Their mission? Find the good stuff, the sensitive data, the keys to the kingdom, and boy did they hit the jackpot. The team found emails containing login credentials for credit and transfer terminals. Basically, they'd stumbled onto a money printing machine that happened to be connected to the internet. But here's the thing, nobody wanted to actually use it. They'd spent too much time and effort getting this far to blow it on some quick cash grab. Nobody wanted to be the idiot who ruined everything. Well, almost nobody. One guy on Arkanoid's team couldn't help himself. The temptation was eating him alive, but he wasn't completely stupid. He knew sending money straight to his own account would be like leaving a neon sign with his name on it. So this unknown hacker started reaching out to people, trying to find someone willing to help. Most people probably thought he was crazy or setting them up. Only one person was desperate enough to listen. Early 1994, St. Petersburg, Russia. It's another late night when the mystery hacker meets a guy called Mr. Levan. They're sitting in Levan's apartment, and the hacker's spilling everything he knows. Levan's got programming skills too, so he gets it immediately. But Levan doesn't want to be partners. He wants to buy the information outright and try this whole scheme solo. After some negotiating, the hacker agrees to sell everything for a whopping $100. Yeah, $100 for the keys to America's banking system. The hacker explains the whole setup, Sprint network, which terminals to hit, what credentials to use. It's like a recipe for digital bank robbery. The next day, Levan follows the instructions perfectly. Within hours, he's staring at the same terminal the hacker promised, one that's actually being used to move real money around. Levan watches Citibank employees do their thing. When everyone goes home, he types in some bank credentials himself. Everything works exactly as advertised. But Levan's not stupid. He knows sending money to his own account would be suicide. He needs a middleman, and lucky for him, he's got connections with the Tambov gang, a local crime group known for extortion, smuggling, and settling disputes with extreme violence. He calls up a friend in the gang and explains his plan. All he needs is someone to open a fresh bank account and withdraw money the next day. Simple job, big payday, no questions asked. July 15th, 1994. Lappeenranta, Finland. Levin's gang buddy calls with the green light. He's ready to grab the cash. Time for the magic show. While Citibank employees are probably dreaming about their lunch breaks, Levin fires up his computer and moves $384,000 from some unsuspecting Uruguayan real estate company straight into his friend's brand new account. One quick phone call later, and his partner, who still has no clue what digital chaos just happened, walks into the Finnish bank like he's making a routine withdrawal. The teller takes one look at this guy asking for nearly $500,000 from an account that's basically still warm from the printer. Suspicious doesn't begin to cover it. The teller disappears to chat with the manager, probably having a mild panic attack, but a few minutes later he's back with a bag full of money. The gang member signs some papers, grabs the cash and strolls out like he just bought groceries. In minutes they'd pulled off what might be the cleanest heist in history. No guns, no masks, no dramatic car chases, just a keyboard and some serious audacity. But while they're probably popping champagne, the Uruguayan company notices they're missing money. They call Citibank, who immediately realizes someone just played them like a fiddle. The FBI gets a very interesting phone call, and suddenly everyone's about to have a very bad day. Let's fast forward to right now for a second. At this exact moment, some small business is getting absolutely wrecked by hackers. And it probably started because Steve from accounting used password 123 for both his Netflix account and the company database. Here's the brutal truth. People love reusing passwords. Same login for Gmail, work email, that sketchy shopping site they visited once. When personal accounts get compromised, hackers use fancy tools to figure out where you work, then try those same credentials on your company's network. Once they're inside your business systems, it's basically Christmas morning for cybercriminals. They steal data, commit fraud, or just drain your bank account while you're wondering why the coffee machine isn't working. Late July 1994, New York City, USA. Just days after the Finnish fiasco, Citibank's security team and some very motivated FBI agents gathered for an emergency meeting. Their mission was simple: catch these digital thieves and stop this madness before it got worse. They figured the hackers were probably still lurking in the network like digital cockroaches, so they decided to monitor every transaction, even after hours, because if there's one thing you can count on with criminals, it's that they never know when to quit. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let the next heist happen, but treat it like a honeypot. Let the thieves think they're winning while the FBI watches whoever tries to withdraw the stolen money. It was basically setting up the world's most expensive sting operation, and just like clockwork, another fraudulent transaction popped up days later. Time for round 2. Late July 1994, Buenos Aires, Argentina. A Tambov gang member lands in Buenos Aires, probably thinking this is the easiest money he'll ever make. He hits a local bank, opens a fresh account, and calls Levan with the details. Simple enough. Levan boots up his computer and initiates another massive transfer, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because why think small? But this time, Citibank is ready. They spot the transaction immediately and start making phone calls. FBI to Argentinian authorities, bank to bank, the whole international law enforcement network lighting up. Meanwhile, the gang member walks into the bank, casual as can be. He asks for his money, but the teller, probably sweating bullets at this point, tells him there's a small issue and asks him to wait. Red flags everywhere. The gang member's street instincts kick in. Wait and risk getting arrested, or bail and lose the payday. While he's weighing his options, Argentinian police are racing through Buenos Aires traffic like it's an action movie. They screech up to the bank, ready for arrests and glory. But the building's empty. The gang member vanished like smoke, probably already calling Levin to explain why their South American vacation got cut short. Levin realizes his perfect scheme just became a lot less perfect. Time to get creative. Mid-August 1994, Tel Aviv, Israel. Meet Alexios Pallades, a supposed Greek tourist who flew into Tel Aviv from St. Petersburg a few days back. Instead of checking out ancient ruins or hitting the beach, this guy spent his entire vacation opening bank accounts. Real exciting stuff. At the exact same time, a woman named Katerina Korova was doing the identical thing in San Francisco, both from St. Petersburg, both obsessed with banking paperwork. What are the odds? August 26th changed everything. 2 massive transactions hit Citibank's system simultaneously, one heading to Israel, one to San Francisco. Levin was getting ambitious, running a 2-city operation like some kind of digital crime lord. Katerina walks into her San Francisco bank ready to collect, but the teller gives her the classic just wait a few minutes stall. Citibank had already called ahead, and the FBI was racing through traffic to meet her. This time, nobody ran. Katerina actually believed the teller and stood there patiently until federal agents walked through the door. First arrest in the books. Meanwhile in Israel, thanks to time zones, the money was just sitting there waiting. Israeli undercover cops had already set up shop at the bank before opening time, probably drinking terrible coffee and pretending to read newspapers. Minutes after the doors opened, Alexios strolls in asking for tens of thousands of dollars, but something felt off. Maybe it was all the customers who looked like they bench-pressed criminals for a living. He bolted. Short chase, quick tackle, case closed. But when they arrested him, this Greek guy started swearing at cops in fluent Russian. Turns out Alexios Palidas was completely fake. His real name was Alexei Lashman, and he was about as Greek as a Moscow winter. Israel calls the FBI with the good news. They've got 2 suspects and this whole mess is finally starting to make sense. Early September 1994, New York. Agent Steve sits down with Katerina Korova for what's probably going to be a very long conversation. After explaining how much trouble she's in, Katerina drops the classic criminal defense, "I had no idea what was happening." But she does reveal something interesting. She didn't come to America alone. Her husband Yevan Korov flew to San Francisco with her, then mysteriously left the country and told her to grab the money when he called. Romantic guy, really. Here's where it gets good. Katerina is absolutely furious with her husband for abandoning her to federal prison. Hell hath no fury like a woman facing serious jail time. She agrees to cooperate, and Steve asks if she can get Yevan to flip too. The phone call between these two must have been spectacular. Katerina was so angry she managed to extract not just cooperation from her husband, but the name of their boss. Even better, she convinced him to do a 3-way call with the FBI. Massive win for the FBI, but there's one tiny problem. Yevan just snitched on the Russian mafia. If the Tambov gang finds out, his life expectancy becomes roughly equivalent to a mayfly's. Early September 1994, JFK Airport, New York. It's barely sunrise when Agent Steve arrives at JFK to pick up his star witness, Yevan Korov. Should be simple. Guy gets off plane, they have a chat, everyone goes home happy, but nothing about this case has been simple. Steve spots Yevan at immigration, but instead of walking through like a normal person, he's having what appears to be a heated argument with border control. Steve walks over to see what's wrong, and gets hit with a curveball that nobody saw coming. Yevan brought his daughter, his actual child, to his arrest, and neither of them has proper visas to enter the United States. Immigration is having none of it. They want to put both of them on the next flight back to Russia, which would completely destroy the FBI's case. Steve starts arguing with immigration officers, which probably wasn't his finest career moment. Then comes the twist that sounds like it's straight out of a bad movie. The immigration officer Steve is arguing with turns out to be his childhood friend. Small world, apparently. Once they recognize each other, suddenly everything becomes much more flexible. Yevan and his daughter get waved through like VIPs at a nightclub. Steve swears this actually happened during his interview with Darknet Diaries. And honestly, reality is weird enough that it's probably true. So now Steve has to deal with 2 parents heading to jail, and a confused kid who's about to spend quality time with FBI agents. They manage to get Katerina released quickly, set the family up in an apartment, and even enroll the daughter in school. The FBI apparently doubled as a social services agency. While Steve was playing family counselor, Vladimir Levan was getting some unwanted attention from the Tambov gang, who decided it was time for their biggest payday yet. September 13th, 1994, Rotterdam, the Netherlands. It's 9 a.m. in Rotterdam, and a Dutch bank is about to have the most interesting morning of their careers. Just before they flip their open sign, a massive $1.5 million transaction slams into their system like a digital freight train. Seconds later, their phone rings. It's the FBI, probably speaking very fast and very loud, explaining that someone's about to walk through their doors asking for this money. Under absolutely no circumstances should they hand over a single penny. Right on cue, a tall guy strolls into the bank like he's making a routine withdrawal. He asks the teller for the money, all of it, and mentions he's in a bit of a hurry. You know, just casual small talk about transferring enough money to buy a decent house. But before the teller can even process what's happening, Dutch police burst through the doors like they're in an action movie. The tall guy's morning just went from great to absolutely terrible. Another one of Levin's schemes crashes and burns spectacularly. But this failure was different. This time he'd really pissed off the wrong people. The Tambov gang had officially run out of patience with Levin's amateur hour performances. Their people kept getting arrested because of his sloppy operations, and they decided it was time for a face-to-face conversation about accountability. The kind of conversation that usually involves broken bones. Levin was now living every criminal's nightmare, hunted by international law enforcement and marked for death by Russian gangsters. But wait, it gets worse. The Russian authorities, who'd been trying to take down the Tambov gang for years, had been wiretapping their phones. They'd intercepted calls between the gang and Levin, which meant Moscow was also looking for him now. After a year of trying to become a digital bank robber, Levin found himself in the worst possible position. He had one move left: run like hell and hope he could disappear before everyone caught up with him. They immediately contacted the FBI with his flight details, and the FBI called their British counterparts, who were now racing through London traffic to get to Stansted Airport in time for his arrival. Around noon, Levin steps off the plane, probably thinking he's finally safe. Maybe he's planning his new life, figuring out how to blend in, wondering if British food is as bad as everyone says. Then 3 British police officers walk up and ruin his entire day. "Welcome to London, Mr. Levin." Meanwhile, Agent Steve and his FBI team are flying in the opposite direction, straight to Russia. Because the Russians hadn't just told them about Levin's escape, they'd also found all his equipment. Turns out Levin had been working for a computer company called Saturn SPB. But he wasn't just writing software and fixing printers. He'd been using their machines to break into Citibank's network, essentially turning his day job into the world's most expensive side hustle. Steve and his team got to examine the computers at a St. Petersburg police station, finally finding the digital evidence they'd been chasing for months. That night, according to Steve, they celebrated by drinking enough vodka to float a small boat. Levin spent 30 months in a British prison before getting extradited to America. But here's where things get weird. To reduce his sentence, he offered to help US law enforcement with cybercrime cases. The problem? When they tested his skills, something didn't add up. Levin barely knew basic hacking techniques, let alone the sophisticated methods used in the Citibank breach. People started wondering if this guy couldn't hack a toaster. How did he pull off the crime of the century? The story takes a dark turn right after Levin gets out of prison in 1998. Instead of laying low and enjoying freedom, he immediately flies to the Czech Republic. Shortly after arriving in Prague, he vanishes completely. Some reports suggest he was murdered, which honestly wouldn't surprise anyone given how many people wanted him dead. But here's the kicker. Right before fleeing to London years earlier, Levin had initiated some mysterious final transactions worth several $1,000,000. He'd moved $3.5 million to accounts belonging to a Czech company called Bonaventure Management SA. Plot twist: this company allegedly belonged to one of Levin's friends. Some people think his friend killed him when the money didn't show up as promised. Others believe the friend helped Levin disappear with a shiny new identity and a comfortable retirement fund. Whatever happened, after 1998, Vladimir Levin ceased to exist. No sightings, no arrests, no mysterious late-night phone calls to old contacts. He'd vanished more completely than a magician's rabbit. Then, 7 years later, the hacking community got a bombshell. A mysterious blog post appeared on a Russian hacking forum, written by someone calling himself Arkanoid. The post explained that Levin was just some regular guy who'd bought hacking secrets from a real cybercriminal group for a measly 100 baht. The missing piece of the puzzle: how someone with basic computer skills pulled off the world's first major cyber heist, finally made sense. But nobody knows who Arkanoid really is. Some people even think it might be Levin himself, writing from wherever he's hiding. Either way, the mastermind behind history's first cyberbank heist remains a mystery. Given how many people wanted him dead, it's probably better that way. The Citibank hack proved that walls and vaults didn't need to be broken physically anymore. Sometimes the weakest link was just a line of code. But while hackers were finding digital backdoors, one man in Japan was proving that old-fashioned prison walls weren't much of an obstacle either. His name was Yoshi Shiratori, a man who would escape captivity not once, not twice, but 4 separate times, earning a place in history as Japan's most legendary escape artist. Today we're talking about a Japanese man who pulled off 4 prison escapes. But his methods weren't just clever, they were absolutely legendary. These epic escape operations turned him into a true legend in Japanese prison history. The kind of guy other inmates still whisper about decades later, probably while planning their own doomed escape attempts that'll end with them face first in the dirt. Meet Yoshi Shiratori, a man who basically invented the art of prison escapes. Shiratori's story starts rough, difficult family, tougher society, the whole tragic backstory package. Early on, he actually tried living honestly and making legitimate money through real work, which is more than most criminals can say. But when playing by the rules got him absolutely nowhere and his stomach kept growling, his life took a predictable turn toward gambling and theft. Because apparently working for scraps wasn't as appealing as a life of crime and quick cash. Eventually he got arrested, but not for theft like you'd expect, murder charges. He swore he was innocent and claimed authorities beat a confession out of him through brutal torture sessions. Whether he was guilty or not, Shiratori found himself locked up in Omori prison in 1936, probably wondering how his life went so spectacularly wrong in such a short time. Life behind bars became a daily nightmare that never ended. Guards treated him like their personal stress relief dummy, delivering savage beatings whenever they felt like working out their frustrations. The Japanese prison system 85 years ago was completely broken. Guards had unlimited power and zero oversight, especially with inmates who annoyed them or committed serious crimes. Shiratori became their favorite target for continuous torture and brutal treatment that would make modern prison conditions look like luxury hotels. Surrounded by this hopeless situation and burning with the injustice of being imprisoned for a crime he claimed he didn't commit, Shiratori made an impossible decision: escape from this living hell, whatever it took. He started planning his escape with the patience of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to think. Step 1 of any successful prison break: study guard routines until you know them better than the guards know themselves. Shiratori noticed that during the early morning hours, guard patrols got sloppy and predictable, with roughly a 15-minute gap between shift changes when nobody was paying attention. This narrow window of opportunity would be his best shot at freedom, and his chance to finally get revenge on the system that destroyed his life. At exactly 5:30 a.m., Shiratori put his plan into action. He'd managed to keep a small metal wire hidden in his cell, probably the most valuable thing he owned besides his sanity. In the bathroom area, there were wooden buckets where inmates did their business, and from one of these lovely toilet buckets he retrieved his makeshift lockpick. Remember, Shiratori had been a thief before his imprisonment, which meant he actually knew how to pick locks. This wasn't some Hollywood nonsense where people magically open doors with hairpins. He waited until dawn approached like a patient spider. As the guard patrol shuffled past, he grabbed his metal wire and started working on the lock. After some tense moments that probably felt like hours, he finally managed to unlock his cell door and step into freedom. Well, sort of freedom. This was just the beginning of his obstacle course. Ahead of him lay several more locked doors that needed the same treatment. One by one, he picked the locks and opened each door until he finally reached the prison walls and climbed over them like some kind of criminal ninja. But could he really open all these locks so easily? First, it wasn't easy at all. Shiratori was just exceptionally skilled at lockpicking. Second, we're talking about 1936, when lock quality was about as reliable as a paper umbrella. The simplicity of those old locks definitely helped make his escape possible. However, guard patrols would return within minutes, and even if he managed to leave the prison, he couldn't go too far without risking discovery. If they detected his escape, alarms would blare, and they would quickly pursue him. Shiratori was well aware of these circumstances. As a final trick, he removed some wooden floorboards in his cell and placed them under a blanket. When the guards passed by his cell, they would assume he was sleeping in his bed. He strategically placed the bed over the area where he had removed the floorboards, making his escape plan seamless. The guards were completely fooled by this simple trick. They only discovered his escape the next morning, when someone finally bothered to actually look inside his cell and found wooden boards instead of a human being. Cue the alarm bells and mass panic. But Shiratori's taste of freedom was incredibly short-lived. The search for him intensified rapidly, and during his escape he'd apparently sustained some injuries that needed medical attention. Since he couldn't exactly walk into a hospital and ask for help, he tried sneaking into one to steal medical supplies. Unfortunately, some hospital staff spotted him and called the police faster than you could say escaped convict. He was caught and dragged back to prison just 3 days after his brilliant escape, probably wondering if those few days of freedom were worth what was coming next. This time Shiratori didn't get sent back to his original prison. Instead, they shipped him off to Akita prison, where the treatment was somehow even worse than before. To the guards there, he wasn't just a murderer, he was also an escape artist, which was deeply insulting to their professional pride. They continued beating him and subjecting him to daily torture, using him as a walking example to deter other inmates from getting any bright ideas about freedom. In addition to the regular beatings, he got assigned to back-breaking hard labor that would have killed weaker men. Sometimes they wouldn't even allow him a mattress, forcing him to sleep on cold concrete floors that probably felt like ice in winter. Worst of all, they frequently shoved him into an incredibly narrow, solitary confinement cell that was basically designed to break people's minds. This cell was unique, almost like a tower with a ridiculously high ceiling. The only light source was a tiny window set so high up that reaching it seemed impossible. The cell was essentially escape-proof, or so they thought. The guards also kept Shiratori in shackles all day, adding continuous beatings and humiliation to his daily routine. The only person who showed even a hint of human decency was the head guard named Kobayashi. The Japanese prison system was incredibly corrupt, with guards having free rein to do whatever they wanted to inmates they didn't like. Even though Kobayashi felt some sympathy for Shiratori, he couldn't stop the other guards from their brutal actions. He could only offer small amounts of compassion, and occasionally ask about Shiratori's well-being, like checking on a sick pet. Kobayashi couldn't create real change or prevent the other guards' cruelty. He was just one decent person in a completely broken system. But even this tiny bit of human kindness was significant for Shiratori, giving him hope and driving him to take a step that he might later regret. Despite this small mercy, Shiratori's suffering continued in that harsh prison until July 15, 1942, when everything would change once again. That night, one of the guards opened the small inspection window on Shiratori's cell door, expecting to see their favorite punching bag sleeping peacefully. Instead, he found an empty cell that made his blood run cold. He immediately unlocked the door and discovered nothing but a bed and some abandoned handcuffs that had once restrained their prisoner. Shiratori had somehow escaped from what was supposed to be an escape-proof fortress. How the hell did he pull this off? First, he had to free himself from the handcuffs, which turned out to be surprisingly easy for someone with his skills. He'd somehow obtained another small metal wire, probably traded for food or stolen during labor, and used his legendary lock-picking abilities to open the cuffs like they were made of paper. But escaping the handcuffs was the easy part. The real challenge was getting out of a cell designed to break people's spirits. The only exit was through a tiny window in the ridiculously high ceiling that seemed impossible to reach. Turns out Shiratori had another useful skill, wall climbing. He could scale walls like some kind of human spider, and actually reach that tiny window. Unfortunately, the iron bars covering it were solid enough to stop a charging bull, and removing them without proper tools seemed completely hopeless. Luckily, the window frame itself was made of wood rather than metal. Even with this advantage, breaking it free would be incredibly difficult, and time-consuming. But Shiratori knew that with enough patience and force, he could eventually destroy the wooden frame and create his escape route. So he developed a nightly routine that would have impressed professional athletes. Every night he'd climb the walls, work on destroying the window frame with his bare hands, then climb back down and put the handcuffs back on to avoid suspicion. This insane routine continued for about 6 months, until he finally succeeded in breaking the frame and removing the entire window. But Shiratori didn't escape immediately after creating his exit route. He was smart enough to wait for the perfect opportunity, which came on a night with howling winds and torrential rain that would mask any noise he made during his escape. None of the guards could hear or see anything through the storm as he made his daring break from the prison that was supposed to hold him forever. The weather became his perfect accomplice in this incredible escape operation. This all happened on the night of July 15, 1942. A violent storm became the backdrop for Shiratori's second escape, proving that with enough determination and ingenuity, even the most secure prison couldn't hold someone who refused to give up on freedom. Shiratori's last escape from Omori prison had lasted only 3 days before he got caught, but this time things were drastically different from every possible angle. After 3 months of freedom following his daring escape, head guard Kobayashi was relaxing at home when he heard an unexpected knock on his door. Opening it, Kobayashi was absolutely stunned to find Shiratori standing right in front of him like some kind of ghost from his professional nightmares. The escaped prisoner's sudden appearance left the guard in complete shock and probably wondering if he was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Without wasting time, Shiratori started talking to ease Kobayashi's obvious surprise and confusion. He said, "I've come to you because I need you to listen to me. You're the only person who ever treated me with basic human decency and actually cared about my well-being. Please give me a chance to explain what's really going on." Kobayashi hesitated for a moment, probably calculating whether this was some kind of trap, then allowed Shiratori to enter his house. Shiratori immediately confessed that he had indeed escaped, but he was willing to surrender himself voluntarily under certain conditions. He explained that his only reason for escaping was the constant torture and inhumane treatment by the other guards. All he wanted was fair treatment and basic human dignity, which apparently was too much to ask for in the Japanese prison system. Shiratori expressed his reluctance to spend the rest of his life as a fugitive, constantly looking over his shoulder and living in fear. What he really wanted was to make his voice heard by higher authorities in the judicial system, hoping they'd realize the extent of corruption and cruelty in the prison system. He told Kobayashi that he'd come to him for help because he was the only person he trusted in the entire system. Given Kobayashi's position as head guard, Shiratori believed his involvement would give credibility to his cause and maybe create real change. Shiratori's plan was incredibly ambitious: reform the system from within rather than live as an outlaw forever. He wanted to achieve freedom through a fair trial where he could properly defend himself, since he still maintained his innocence regarding the murder charge. This was a massive gamble. Shiratori understood the enormous challenges ahead, and knew that without support from someone credible like Kobayashi, his chances of success were practically zero. Kobayashi, still processing this surreal situation, advised Shiratori to take a shower and prepare some food while they discussed the matter more extensively. Shiratori felt genuinely hopeful about Kobayashi's seemingly sympathetic reaction, believing his desperate plan might actually have a chance to succeed. Unfortunately, Shiratori, after a few moments, found himself surrounded by the police from all sides, who arrested him, returning him to prison once again. On that day, Shiratori lost his last trace of hope in humanity and swore to never trust anyone again. Back to prison again, but this time wasn't like the others. During his trial, Shiratori begged to go to Tokyo prison because the weather was warmer there. The northern prisons he'd been in before, Omori and Akita, were freezing cold, but instead of Tokyo, they shipped him to Abashiri prison in far north Japan, the coldest spot in the country. Shiratori's 2 escapes made the authorities hate him more. They wanted to make an example of him, scare other prisoners from trying to escape. Abashiri was known for tight security, basically Japan's version of Alcatraz. Just like Alcatraz had water all around it, Abashiri had snow everywhere. Even if someone got out of the prison, the cold and isolation would probably kill them. Shiratori arrived at Abashiri in winter 1943. The temperature inside the cells was below freezing. Guards threw him into his new cell and left him chained on the cold floor. The clothes they gave him were useless against the harsh cold. Right away he felt the bitter cold coming from the ground, walls, and even the air he breathed. The guards standing over him laughed after throwing him on the frozen floor. Angry and desperate, Shiratori tried to make them stop laughing, but instantly found himself on the ground as guards jumped him and beat him up. Even after the beating, Shiratori's fierce determination made him stand up to them. He let out a loud roar, and some kind of power came from him that made the guards step back for a moment. But the real shock came when they looked at his hands and saw the metal restraints were broken. One thing about Shiratori was his incredible strength, way stronger than normal people. But this move was a big mistake because it showed the guards one of his special abilities. After seeing this, the guards took extra precautions and made a highly secure custom cell designed specifically for Shiratori's extraordinary abilities. The cell was basically a metal tomb, reinforced walls, armored doors, and windows so small a cat would struggle to fit through. But the guards weren't satisfied with just that. They decided to get creative with Shiratori's punishment. They strapped 20 kilograms of iron restraints on him, locking his hands behind his back and chaining his legs so tight he could barely stand up straight. These weren't your typical handcuffs with little keys. These restraints were welded completely shut. No locks, no keys, no easy way out. They stayed on him all the time, only coming off once every 2 weeks when they let him bathe. Getting them off required special welders with proper equipment. Even eating became a humiliating crawl to the bottom of the door where they shoved food through a tiny slot. since his hands were permanently stuck behind his back. The armored cell, the bone-chilling cold, the heavy metal chains, the pathetic meals, nobody in their right mind should have been able to escape from this frozen nightmare. Yet Shiratori was quickly becoming something more than just another prisoner. His plan to break out of this icy prison, and the way he actually pulled it off, would become one of the most legendary escape stories in all of Japanese prison history, proving that some people just refuse to stay caged. After 6 months of Shiratori rotting away in Abashiri prison, on the night of August 26, 1943, a guard walked up to the cell window for his routine check. What he saw nearly gave him a heart attack. The cell contained nothing but a neatly made bed, folded clothes, and those heavy iron shackles sitting there completely empty. Shiratori had vanished without a trace, like he'd simply dissolved into thin air. How did this guy manage to pull off escape number 3 under these seemingly impossible conditions? The answer lay in something as simple as miso soup. This watery, tasteless soup was standard prison food for all inmates. It didn't have much nutrition, but it packed plenty of salt, and salt has this wonderful property of making iron rust much faster than normal. Shiratori figured out this little chemistry lesson and started his long-term project. Iron doesn't just crumble overnight, and months dragged by slowly before any real signs of weakening and rust started showing up. This raised a critical question, though. How come the welders who removed his restraints every 2 weeks never noticed the rust developing over all those months? The answer was pure genius. Shiratori only applied the soup to joints and hidden areas where the welders wouldn't normally look during their quick removal process. Plus, the restraints were painted black, which did a perfect job of hiding the rust damage. As for the window frame, it was held together with screws and bolts that got weaker as rust ate through them, making it much easier to remove than the shackles. But then came a major problem. The window opening was deliberately designed to be smaller than Shiratori's body. This was during the chaotic period of World War II, when American bombers were constantly attacking Japan. Power outages happened all the time, and Shiratori kept watching for any opportunity. His big chance finally came on the evening of August 26, 1943. The electricity cut out that night, and he didn't waste a second. Shiratori had spent months carefully studying the weak points in his restraints, focusing on specific areas where rust had done the most damage. He immediately started his delicate operation. He worked methodically to remove the corroded screws from the window bars, then skillfully dislocated his shoulder to slip through the opening that was supposed to be too small for his body. With one final desperate push, he climbed up to the prison roof, which wasn't nearly as secure as the cells below, and had several glass windows. One by one, he carefully shattered a glass window, giving him access to the rooftop and his path to freedom. And just like that, Shiratori succeeded once again, completing his 3rd incredible prison escape with perfect execution. This escape was by far the most challenging and complex of all his attempts. He became the first and last person in history to successfully escape from the notorious Abashiri prison. Today, the old prison has been converted into a museum that features a detailed model of Shiratori's most famous moment, the instant he emerged onto the roof and smashed through that glass window before disappearing into the night. But even after pulling off this extraordinary escape, Shiratori found himself facing an entirely different kind of problem. Abashiri prison was completely isolated, surrounded by endless snow in every direction, located far from any populated areas or towns. His only realistic option was to head into the dangerous mountains and try to survive there. Despite the massive search operations launched by prison guards, local police and government authorities, Shiratori managed to leave absolutely no trace in the surrounding area. Most people assumed it was completely impossible to survive under such harsh conditions, and figured he had probably died either from the brutal cold or from the wild predators that roamed these remote regions. This was certainly what the authorities believed, but reality turned out to be quite different. Shiratori managed to locate an abandoned mine hidden deep in the Hokkaido mountains. He slowly transformed this old mine into a makeshift shelter that could protect him from both the freezing temperatures and the dangerous wildlife. He adapted to a primitive lifestyle, learning to survive on whatever he could find: nuts, wild berries, and rabbits he managed to catch. He even taught himself how to fish in the mountain streams. Living completely alone in these isolated mountains, he embraced a life of total solitude, staying far away from civilization and anyone who might be hunting for him. During this long period of isolation, his desperate longing for his wife and young daughter, whom he had been forced to leave behind when he first went to prison, grew stronger with each passing day. It had been nearly a full decade since he had last seen their faces, and he understood that returning to them under his current circumstances was absolutely impossible. He continued living in complete seclusion, facing the endless stretch of time completely alone in those unforgiving mountains. After 2 years living like a hermit in the mountains, Shiratori decided it was time to check out the real world again. When he walked into the first town since escaping Abashiri prison, he couldn't believe what he saw. American soldiers were everywhere, walking around like they owned the place. Signs and billboards had English translations all over them. Shiratori grabbed a newspaper and started flipping through it, trying to figure out what the hell had happened while he was playing Mountain Man. That's when he learned about the atomic bombs America had dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He also found out that Japan had surrendered the war back in 1945. This news hit him like a brick. If the war was over, maybe the authorities had bigger things to worry about than one escaped prisoner. Maybe he could finally go home to his family. For the first time in years, hope started creeping back into his heart. With new determination, Shiratori started the long trek from northern Japan all the way south to find his family. After 50 days of walking from city to city, he reached a town called Sapporo. He was starving and spotted a farm with tomato plants. He wandered in and started eating, which turned out to be the worst decision of his life. A local farmer caught him red-handed and assumed he was just another thief. The farmer confronted him, things got heated, and the guy ended up falling and cracking his head on a rock. The farmer died right there. People heard the commotion, surrounded Shiratori, and held him until police showed up to arrest him. This time around, Shiratori looked different. Age was catching up with him, and the constant stress of prison life was wearing him down. He spent most of his time staring at the ceiling with this sad, defeated look on his face. It seemed like the fight had finally gone out of him. Shiratori started sleeping all the time, completely ignoring the guards when they called to him. He'd just lie there under his blanket like he didn't care about anything anymore. Sometimes guards would come into his cell and beat him up. It became such a regular thing that even they got bored of it. He wouldn't even react to the beatings, just lay there like a broken man who'd given up on life completely. Then one night the guards called to him as usual and got no response. They walked into the cell ready to deliver another round of punishment, but what they found made their blood freeze. Shiratori was completely motionless under the blanket. When they pulled it back, they found nothing but wooden panels arranged to look like a sleeping body. Unlike his previous escapes, this time Shiratori had gone underground. All that staring at the ceiling had been an act to make the guards think he was looking for an exit above, when really he was planning his way out from below. Nobody had expected Shiratori to spend his nights carefully removing wooden floor panels, and it wasn't easy work. He used his soup bowl as a digging tool, scraping away at the ground night after night. His complete indifference to the guards and their calls was all part of the plan, convincing them he wasn't a threat so he could dig in peace, especially during the dark hours. Lucky for him, he found the perfect place to dump all the dirt he was excavating. There was plenty of space between the cell floor and its foundation where he could hide the evidence. He kept up this routine for about a month, until he finally managed to dig a tunnel that led outside his cell. This escape was totally different from the others. He'd literally tunneled his way to freedom. All that fake contemplation and ceiling staring had been nothing but a clever diversion while he was actually building an underground exit. This unexpected approach made his fourth escape ironically the easiest one yet. The whole story sounds like something out of a movie, and plenty of people have trouble believing it actually happened, but every single event has been documented and verified. This was Shiratori's final escape attempt, though it wouldn't be his last time behind bars. He'd return for a fifth stay in prison, but this time everything would be completely different. Picture this. After everything he'd been through, after finally outsmarting the police and authorities for years, he got busted again because of one stupid moment of hunger. When the police realized they'd caught Shiratori, the guy who pulled off the greatest prison escape in Japanese history, they practically threw a party. Shiratori found himself standing in Sapporo's courthouse, and this time the judgment was brutal. His previous escapes had really ticked off the system, and now he had a dead farmer on his hands. The court ruled it murder and slapped him with a death sentence. In 1947, they shipped him to Sapporo's local prison to wait for his execution date. The authorities weren't taking any chances this time. They assigned 6 guards to watch him around the clock, no breaks, no shifts off. They reinforced every window and exit in his cell, making the opening so small that barely his head could fit through. The whole setup looked completely escape-proof. But the guards made one critical mistake. They were so confident in their fortress that they didn't bother chaining him up. They left him completely unrestrained inside his cell. One day, Shiratori was sitting on a bench in a public park when someone walked over and sat down next to him. When he glanced over and saw it was a police officer, his heart nearly stopped. Natural instinct kicked in and he started worrying about being recognized and arrested again. But the officer was actually friendly and started making casual conversation. Then the guy opened his cigarette case and offered Shiratori one. This simple gesture hit Shiratori harder than any punch to the gut. Cigarettes were expensive luxuries back then, and here was a complete stranger, a cop no less, sharing one with him. The kindness made him think that maybe there was still some goodness left in the country and its people, even among law enforcement. This went against everything he'd promised himself after Kobayashi, that prison guard who'd betrayed his trust years earlier. In that moment, something inside Shiratori shifted. He decided to turn himself in. It was a strange situation, but clearly he was exhausted from years of running and constantly looking over his shoulder. Meeting this decent police officer gave him hope that maybe the system had changed for the better, that someone might actually treat him fairly this time. Plus, there were rumors going around that the country's justice system was going through major reforms. Shiratori actually went through with surrendering himself. When they reopened his case, things started looking up. The dead farmer incident got reclassified as self-defense, and since the original murder that landed him in prison was based on a confession extracted through torture, his sentences got cut way down. In the end, they gave him 20 years with the possibility of early release. Shiratori's case became huge news and sparked major discussions about reforming Japan's justice and prison systems. He basically became the poster child for prison reform. They let him serve his remaining time in a Tokyo prison, where the weather was much warmer than those frozen hellholes up north. This time around, the guards treated him with actual respect and consideration. Despite still being locked up, Shiratori finally found some peace. His long-held dream of serving time in decent conditions had come true, and he didn't feel any urge to escape anymore. Because of his good behavior and cooperation, they granted him early release after 14 years in 19... Shiratori's escapes showed how one determined man could outsmart walls, guards, and even an entire justice system. But sometimes it isn't human cunning that writes the darkest chapters. It's a disaster. Events so massive and destructive that no one could slip through, no matter how clever or desperate they were. Next, we'll look at 3 of the worst disasters in history, moments where survival itself came down to sheer luck. Back in the summer of 2010, 33 Chilean miners became household names after getting stuck in what was basically a tiny underground closet, 2,300 feet below the surface. That's about 700 meters if anyone's keeping score. Their rescue operation dragged on for 70 days and brought helpful volunteers from all corners of the world. The ironic part? One of the most skilled and experienced rescue teams came from South Africa, which makes what happened next pretty interesting. Then in March 2016, 3 miners at the Lily mine in South Africa just vanished into a massive sinkhole right over the deepest part of their operation. Unlike those famous Chilean miners, these 3 guys were only trapped 230 feet down, roughly 70 meters below ground. Seems like it should have been easier, right? Wrong. Their rescue turned out to be way more complicated and dangerous than anyone expected. Statistics tell us that about 15,000 miners die around the world every year, though the real number is probably much higher since accidents in developing countries often get swept under the rug or never reported at all. Mining deaths have been dropping in recent years, which is good news, but the job remains incredibly dangerous, especially in places where safety regulations are more like gentle suggestions. Mining employed nearly 500,000 South Africans in 2022 and contributed about 8% of the country's GDP. Pretty impressive numbers. But miners and their families keep saying that safety gets tossed aside whenever profit and speed become priorities. Like most mining operations, the Lily mine is mostly hidden beneath what looks like perfectly ordinary ground on the surface. Underground, the whole thing consists of 12 different rock layers that plunge down almost 660 feet, about 200 meters, below the mine's west entrance. Detailed maps show that most of the space between ground level and the bottom is basically hollow now, since miners have already hauled out so much valuable ore over the years, to prevent the entire structure from collapsing like a house of cards. Engineers deliberately left a relatively thin column of solid rock called a crown pillar, standing between the different levels. Think of it as the mine's backbone. Shortly after clocking in for their shifts on February 5, 2016, 3 Lily Mine surface employees were going about their usual business inside a shipping container that had been converted into a lamp room. Nothing fancy, just their daily routine of charging, servicing, and distributing the hand-carried and helmet-mounted lamps that underground miners needed every single day. The morning started out completely normal, like any other workday, but then around 8 a.m., disaster struck without warning. A section of that crucial crown pillar directly beneath their container suddenly gave way and collapsed. In the terrifying seconds that followed, all 3 miners disappeared into a 230-foot sinkhole that opened up like the earth had just swallowed them whole. As the container plummeted downward, it got completely buried under thousands of tons of massive boulders and debris. When the dust and rocks finally stopped falling and everything settled, a total of 75 miners found themselves trapped in various tunnels and sections throughout the mine. Initially, nobody had any clue whether the 3 men in the container had survived the fall, or if their workspace had been crushed flat by the enormous weight of rock that came crashing down on top of them. Immediately after the collapse happened, emergency alarms started blaring throughout the facility, and standard safety protocols kicked into high gear. Rescue teams mobilized quickly, and fortunately, the 75 miners who were trapped in other areas of the mine were successfully rescued and brought back to the surface safely within just a few hours of the incident. The rescue operation then shifted its entire focus to the 3 workers trapped in that lamp room, now buried under massive amounts of rock and debris. However, as the rescue efforts got underway, it became crystal clear just how incredibly challenging this mission would be, mainly because the ground remained extremely unstable and dangerous. Initial engineering assessments confirmed everyone's worst fears. The critical crown pillar had indeed collapsed completely, which caused the ground above to cave in dramatically. This collapse also triggered additional ground movements and aftershocks that put all the rescue workers in serious danger. Despite these hazardous conditions, rescue teams tried every technique they could think of in their desperate attempts to reach the trapped miners. Heavy machinery was brought in to carefully remove debris, piece by piece, and advanced drilling equipment was used to try establishing a stable pathway down to the buried container. High-tech cameras and sensitive listening devices were also deployed in hopes of making some kind of contact with the trapped workers, but unfortunately, no communication was ever successfully established. As the rescue operation continued day after day, the families of the trapped miners gathered at the mine site, setting up what became a permanent vigil while waiting anxiously for any news about their loved ones. The waiting must have been absolutely brutal. Meanwhile, every single attempt to stabilize the unstable ground and systematically remove the massive amounts of debris seemed to only make things worse by triggering additional collapses, making the safety of the rescue teams an ongoing major concern. Soon enough, the hours stretched into days, then the days turned into weeks, and by late February, if the miners were somehow still alive inside that buried container far below the surface, their chances of survival were becoming dangerously slim with each passing day. Tragically, after weeks of non-stop efforts, the authorities made the heartbreaking decision in late April 2016 to call off the rescue operations completely. This choice devastated everyone involved, especially the families of the 3 men who had literally been swallowed up by the earth. The site had become way too dangerous to continue operations without risking even more lives, so the focus shifted to honoring the lost miners and trying to help their families cope with the unthinkable loss. Unfortunately, the official investigation into what went wrong only made things worse and added to everyone's anger and frustration. When investigators finally released their report less than a month later, it revealed some pretty damning information. The company had completely failed to install proper support systems on the roof of level 4 of the mine. Basically, that crown pillar everyone was counting on wasn't nearly strong enough to hold up all the weight pressing down on it from above. The situation got even worse, because of numerous tunnels that had been dug without proper authorization, essentially illegal mining operations that weakened the entire structure even more. The investigation report revealed even more disturbing details that made everyone's blood boil. There had been several similar collapses in the western section of Lily Mine during the days right before the main disaster. These should have been massive warning signs screaming that something terrible was about to happen. Mine management and safety personnel definitely should have recognized these as clear indicators that even worse catastrophes were coming. But somehow, either surprisingly or completely predictably depending on how cynical someone feels about corporate priorities. Absolutely no safety precautions were ever implemented. The report also discovered that according to standard mine safety regulations, that shipping containers should have been positioned at least 100 meters away from the open pit area. If the company had followed basic safety rules, the container wouldn't have been sitting in such a vulnerable and dangerous location when the ground gave way. But perhaps the most infuriating and mind-boggling finding of all was when investigators concluded that conditions actually should have been safe enough to launch full-scale search and rescue operations almost immediately after the collapse happened. Some people have even suggested that regular mining operations never completely stopped while the so-called rescue was supposedly underway. With that revelation, everyone wanted to know why almost nothing meaningful was actually done to save those 3 men. The whole situation raised an obvious and painful question. How were South African rescue volunteers able to successfully help Chilean miners trapped 700 meters underground, thousands of miles away in a foreign country, but 3 local mine employees stuck just 70 meters down couldn't be saved in their own backyard? The victims' families eventually filed lawsuits against the company, but sadly, it doesn't look like anyone will ever be held truly accountable for the preventable tragedy that occurred during the spring of 2016. Most people know about the horrors of World War I, the poison gas, shell shock, and countless soldiers charging into machine gun fire. It earned the grim nickname the war to end all wars for good reason. But sometimes during massive wars, other terrible disasters happen that get completely overshadowed by all the fighting and chaos going on around them. On June 28, 1914, Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia got assassinated in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. What followed was basically a domino effect of countries honouring old defence agreements they'd signed years earlier. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire lined up on one side, while England, France, Russia, Japan and the United States formed the other team. The stage was set for a global conflict unlike anything the world had ever witnessed before. Down in southern Europe, Italy initially stayed out of the whole mess, despite having a mutual defence pact with Austria-Hungary from 4 decades earlier. Meanwhile, America and Britain really wanted Italy on their side, since having an ally in the Mediterranean would be incredibly valuable strategically. During secret backroom negotiations, Allied representatives made Italy an offer they couldn't refuse: new territory in an area of the Austrian Alps. This region had been a major source of irritation for Italy, because most of the people living there spoke Italian and were ethnically Italian anyway. When this deal got finalized in spring 1915, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary and officially joined the Allied cause. Following this declaration, Austro-Hungarian forces launched a major offensive against Italy along their southern border in spring 1916. Pretty quickly, Italian military commanders started worrying that the Austro-Hungarians would keep advancing until they reached important northern cities. To stop this potential invasion, the Italians sent a large force north to meet the invaders head-on in the mountains. The 2 opposing armies finally collided in late 1916 near Mount Marmolada. This battlefront eventually stretched over 300 miles, and the brutal multi-year mountain campaign became known as the White War. Troops on both sides got alpine training beforehand, but nothing could have prepared them for the absolute nightmare they were about to experience. With mountains everywhere, both armies desperately wanted the highest ground possible, since elevated positions would let them launch attacks and rain artillery shells down on their exposed enemies below. But getting there meant moving thousands of men and thousands of tons of weapons and equipment up sheer rocky and ice-covered mountains, using a jerry-rigged system of ropes, pulleys and cables hanging from dangerous cliffs. Not surprisingly, unlike the Western Front, the mountainous terrain between Italy and Austria-Hungary wasn't suitable for those massive infantry charges. This probably saved tens of thousands of lives, but the conditions during the White War were absolutely brutal anyway. Small infantry skirmishes and heavy artillery bombardments happened regularly, but major offensive operations became nearly impossible as winter conditions got worse. Soon enough, what started as a war between men turned into a life-or-death struggle between soldiers and Mother Nature herself. To make everything even worse, that particular winter was one of the most severe on record. At Mount Marmolada's peak, the snowpack reportedly reached more than 40 feet. That's about 12 meters deep. On top of that, occasional periods of milder weather caused repeated thawing and refreezing cycles that partially melted the snow and made the ice much heavier and more unstable than it normally would have been. To protect themselves from both the bitter cold and enemy attacks, soldiers on each side dug extensive networks of trenches and tunnels through solid rock, snow and ice. When everything was finished, the Austro-Hungarian troops had established their position at a barracks near the edge of Mount Marmolada. This location provided excellent protection from artillery fire, but the barracks also sat directly underneath hundreds of thousands of tons of unstable ice and snow, basically a disaster waiting to happen. As snow kept piling up higher and higher, both the commanding officers and regular troops knew they were in serious danger of getting wiped off the mountainside by a massive avalanche. However, when they requested permission to relocate to a safer spot further down the mountain, High Command denied their request. More snow fell the following week during a series of storms, and eventually all communication with the outside world got cut off completely. As this situation continued, these stranded soldiers were also running dangerously low on essential supplies like food, fuel, and ammunition. Then, just before sunrise on Wednesday morning, December 13th, 1916, more than 330 exhausted soldiers got violently woken from their sleep when a massive sheet of ice, snow, and rock broke away from the slope above them and crashed into their barracks with devastating force. In just a few terrifying seconds, the entire structure collapsed completely, and nearly all of the men got totally buried under tons of debris. When the snow finally stopped moving, the full scope of this disaster became clear. The few soldiers who had been away from the barracks immediately rushed to dig out anyone they could find, and they managed to pull a few dozen soldiers and officers to safety. But 270 men were still missing and presumed dead. This desperate rescue effort continued throughout the day under absolutely unthinkable conditions. Rescuers battled everything from frostbite and snow blindness to secondary avalanches and dangerous rock slides, but despite their heroic efforts, no additional survivors were found after those first crucial hours. Later that same day, Italian forces in nearby positions suffered a similar terrible fate when they also got blindsided by yet another massive avalanche. All told, nearly 2,300 soldiers and civilians on both sides may have died in avalanches on that single day, Wednesday, December 13th, 1916. Many of the bodies weren't recovered until the following spring thaw, but hundreds more were never found at all. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning of the nightmare. Nobody knows exactly how many avalanches occurred on and around Mount Marmolada during the winter of 1916. It's also unclear precisely how many soldiers and civilians got killed by avalanches, but historical data suggests the number may be as high as 10,000 people. Many of these avalanches were undoubtedly caused by exceptionally heavy snowfall, combined with those periodic thawing and refreezing cycles that made the snow far heavier and more dangerous than normal. But the weather alone wasn't entirely to blame for this catastrophe. The constant digging, tunneling, and blasting through solid rock almost certainly had a destabilizing effect on the mountainside, as did the artillery and mortar shells that regularly exploded in areas where most of the avalanches occurred. Some historical sources even claim that gunners on both sides intentionally aimed their weapons at the masses of snow and ice hanging above enemy positions, with the specific intent of triggering deadly avalanches. Whatever the exact cause, the winter of 1916 and the location of that particular battle line combined to create a perfect storm of destruction. By the time the war finally ended nearly 2 years later, both sides may have collectively suffered nearly 180,000 casualties in the mountain campaign alone. Of those massive casualties, it's estimated that as many as 1/3 may not have been killed by enemy action, but instead by avalanches, landslides, exposure, frostbite, illness, falls, and other non-combat related accidents. Incredibly, even today, mountaineers, hikers, and other visitors to the area regularly discover gear and equipment left behind by soldiers from both sides over a century ago. Today, White Friday is considered the deadliest series of avalanches in recorded history. Arthur Allen Holland, who went by Bud, was born in Suffolk, Virginia on September 7, 1947. From childhood, he was obsessed with flying and everything aviation-related. He enrolled in the Reserve Officers Training Corps while studying at the University of North Carolina. After graduation and extra training, he got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force Reserve at just 23 years old. Later on, Bud got married, had 2 daughters, and started accumulating flight hours and experience in his favorite aircraft, the B-52. The B-52 Stratofortress entered service back in 1955 and has become one of the most iconic and longest-serving military aircraft ever built. These machines are absolutely massive, featuring 8 engines, swept wings, and stretching nearly 160 feet or 48 meters from nose to tail. They're enormous long-range bombers capable of taking off at weights approaching 500,000 pounds. The newest versions can reach top speeds over 600 miles per hour, but they can also be extremely unforgiving aircraft to fly, especially when pilots push them beyond their design limits. Unfortunately, as Bud's career advanced, he increasingly started doing things in B-52s that were dangerous, reckless, and came dangerously close to being fatal for everyone involved. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning of the nightmare. Nobody knows exactly how many avalanches occurred on and around Mount Marmolada during the winter of 1916. It's also unclear precisely how many soldiers and civilians got killed by avalanches, but historical data suggests the number may be as high as 10,000 people. The first documented incident happened in 1991, when Bud made an unauthorized flyover of his daughter's softball game. At just 2,500 feet altitude, he threw the massive airplane into a circular 65-degree bank that one witness later described as looking like a death spiral. During this insane maneuver, the B-52 dropped nearly 1,000 feet before Bud somehow managed to regain control and return to base. Surprisingly, nobody took any formal disciplinary action for this stunt, but the crew members never forgot the terrifying experience that almost killed them all. In mid-May of that same year, Bud violated even more safety regulations during an aerial demonstration flight. He flew directly over civilian spectators at an altitude well below the minimum established safety requirements. Once again, there were absolutely no consequences for his dangerous actions. Similar scary incidents kept happening over and over, and the complete lack of intervention from his superiors only encouraged Bud to continue his reckless behavior and actually make it even worse whenever possible. Finally, after yet another similar incident at the Fairchild Air Show in Washington State in May 1991, a senior base officer warned him that he'd be grounded permanently if he didn't start following the rules and cleaning up his act. However, neither the warning nor any of Bud's previous violations were ever properly documented in his file. In March 1994, he committed another serious violation while commanding a B-52 on a training mission at the Yakima bombing range. During this exercise, the crew was accompanied by a photographer whose job was documenting how bombs get dropped from aircraft, despite an established minimum altitude of 500 feet for safety reasons. Bud flew the massive B-52 just 30 feet over a rocky ridgeline on the first pass. On a subsequent pass, the plane cleared the rocks by only 3 feet, basically close enough to scrape paint. After the flight ended, the photographer was visibly shaken by what he'd witnessed, and the entire crew made a pact to never fly with Bud again. The co-pilot later testified that he actually had to yank back on the controls and yell at Bud to climb higher to prevent the aircraft from smashing into the ground. Bud's response was apparently just to laugh and call the co-pilot a crude slang term for female anatomy. Following this incident, the squadron commander filed a report about what happened and officially recommended that Bud be permanently removed from flying duty, but the colonel in charge only gave Bud another verbal warning. From that point forward, there was obvious tension between Bud and his commanding officer. Amazingly, despite his track record, Bud got selected as the command pilot for the Fairchild Air Show's B-52 demonstration just a few months later. On the morning of June 24, 1994, Bud and his crew started preparations for the air show that was scheduled to begin later that afternoon. The weather was perfect and clear, and the pre-flight inspection revealed no mechanical problems whatsoever. Besides Bud serving as the lead pilot, the crew included his commanding colonel as co-pilot, 46-year-old safety observer Colonel Robert Wolfe, and a navigator radar operator. Their flight plan included a challenging but relatively standard series of low-altitude passes, turns, and banking maneuvers, plus a dramatic touch-and-go landing on runway 23. This particular flight would also be Colonel Wolfe's final mission before retirement. According to tradition, he'd be greeted on the tarmac after the show by family members and colleagues who would douse him with water as a celebratory send-off. At approximately 2 p.m., while the families of all the crewmen watched from the spectator gallery, the B-52 took off and completed the flight's preliminary elements without any problems. However, when Bud was preparing for the touch-and-go landing on runway 23, air traffic control notified him that a tanker aircraft had just landed, and he'd have to circle around and make another approach. At this point, Bud was already flying dangerously low at just 250 feet altitude, so he initiated a 360-degree left turn. He also had to alter his course slightly to avoid a small section of restricted airspace in the area. When the aircraft was about 3/4 of the way through the turn at approximately 2:16 p.m., something went terribly wrong. The wings tilted past 90 degrees, which meant that instead of being parallel to the ground like they should be, the aircraft was in a completely vertical position, perpendicular to the ground. In other words, this enormous aircraft was literally flying on its side. Just a few seconds later, the nose pitched sharply downward, the left wingtip clipped a power line, and the massive aircraft slammed into the ground and exploded into a massive fireball just a few hundred yards away from horrified onlookers. Fortunately, nobody on the ground got injured or killed, but everyone aboard the aircraft died instantly, including Colonel Wolfe, whose family was waiting just a few hundred feet away to celebrate his retirement. The Air Force immediately launched 2 separate investigations after the crash. The first investigation was headed by the Chief of Safety, while the second was conducted by the official Accident Investigation Board. Though their final findings differed slightly on some details, both investigations agreed on the main cause of the crash and how the situation developed after the first touch-and-go attempt got called off. Specifically, Bud's personality and his previous dangerous behavior that had gone completely unchecked were identified as primary contributing factors. Investigators also determined that the B-52's airspeed was approximately 182 knots, about 209 miles per hour, when it entered that final deadly turn sequence. Here's the crucial physics problem. Airplane wings create less and less lift as they transition from horizontal to vertical positions. By the time the wings reached 90 degrees, they were essentially producing no lift whatsoever. Aircraft can sometimes remain airborne in situations like this, if engine power gets increased sufficiently to offset the complete loss of lift. The B-52's flight recording system, basically the black box, did show that either Bud or the Colonel attempted to make several corrections and increase engine power shortly before the crash. However, the power increase didn't happen soon enough, because unlike piston engines that respond almost immediately to throttle inputs, the B-52's turbofan engines can take up to 8 full seconds to respond to throttle changes. As a result, the aircraft's speed dropped to about 145 knots, just 167 miles per hour. With insufficient power and no lift whatsoever at just a few hundred feet above the ground, Bud Holland had placed himself, his crew, and the aircraft under his command in a completely unrecoverable situation. During an Air Force court-martial hearing in mid-May 1995, Bud's commanding officer pleaded guilty to 2 counts of dereliction of duty for failing to address Bud's troubling behavior when he had multiple opportunities to do so. However, once again, the punishment only included a written reprimand and forfeiture of $7,500 in salary. The Air Force also never revealed whether anyone else in the chain of command received any disciplinary action whatsoever. At the time of his death, Bud Holland had served in the Air Force for more than 2 decades. On that fateful day in summer 1994, he was only a few months away from retirement. Perhaps the only small consolation from this preventable disaster is that it happened far enough away from the crowd of spectators gathered at the airfield that day.